Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt Santee, and today on the show is with me is Carol Garboden Murray.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Carol, I just have to tell the story because I just finished using Illuminating Care as a text for the first time. We used it as the textbook for our just introduction to early childhood education class. And the discussions were so amazing. So some of it was just reading it and then we'll discuss it in class and build on it. And some of it was read it and then we'll do this discussion board online together about it. And it was so amazing to watch the connections and read their thoughts. But one day in class, one of the students was talking, referring back to the chapter we'd read. And she said, well, I think I agree with Murray when she says,
I
like,
love
Murray.
it.
Oh, you mean my friend Carol?
I love that so much.
But it was so funny. It's like, yeah, she's Murray. Yeah, she says.
That's like a dream. To imagine that being read to college students is like beyond my wildest dreams, and it makes me so happy.
I hope other campuses will use it. We have to,
I've got some syllabuses from people in Canada who are using it.
Oh, yeah.
One who was using it like at a 4-year college for like an ethics course, looking at
Oh,
disability rights and care rights and things like that.
yeah. Well, we added it to our, so I'm part of a statewide system of community colleges and there's several campuses and we have to all agree on the textbook. So I added it as a supplemental text so it could be added into whatever class we want it to be in. So I used it mainly in 100, but I will probably be weaving, bits of it in.
Makes me so happy.
In lots of classes. Yeah, well, thank you. So anyway, that was a big, long thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's exciting.
So Carol and I are going to talk about assessment, I guess, is where this really came from, and sort of moving away from, I think you called it clinical assessments, to find other ways to be more authentic in what we're doing with information that we have about what children are doing with us. So that kind of led into a discussion of learning stories and Tom Drummond. So I'm just going to go ahead and read this quote from him. And so Tom Drummond writes, there is a dominant discourse in our society that early education is preparation for the future, and that developmental psychology with its focus on ages and stages can be the framework for early education, that children need adults to measure and fix them. These dominant discourses lead us away from closely examining the amazing events that happen in children's lives every day that show how brilliant and capable young children are. I love that. It comes from a blog post, an article online that we'll post with this when the episode comes out, but it was also powerful, but just that idea that the way we currently do things leads us away from those amazing events that are happening.
Yeah, it's like, what are we going to spend our time looking at, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it was so sort of validating for me because I have to teach about observation and assessment, and I know what they want me to teach. I know what they want me to do, but we end up having discussions that center more on the kind of learning stories and deep ongoing observation, not just today's the day we do our checklist and assessments are due next week. And sometimes I feel like when I'm talking, especially when I'm talking to young students, who maybe haven't ever been presented with a different way of thinking about it, I feel like, well, am I exaggerating? I mean, am I making it these little amazing moments to be more than they really are? Like I start to question myself because I'm not talking to anyone who is on that page with me. So this was nice to bring me back to, yes, I should definitely keep those conversations going with people.
It's so true. I feel insecure about it too, because we have been trained, and I was a special ed teacher too. So, so much with screening, evaluation, referrals, assessment, IEPs, deficits.
Yeah.
It was really, really such a big part of the way we were trained to look at children. And I guess also because I have, I've done a lot of training on my own, like Gazelle developmental training. And I do find myself, like, I've learned a lot from those formal tools. And I incorporate them into the way I understand children, just little things like knowing that, the 3-year-old is making the circle, and then the 4-year-old is working on those diagonals or the triangle, just little tiny
Yeah.
milestones I love those, having that knowledge.
Mhm.
Um, so
Yeah.
I get insecure too about like just moving, just throwing it all away.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a place, I think, for those kinds of developmental checklists that we tend to use and call it assessment.
Right?
But we're doing it in the wrong direction most of the time, I
Exactly.
think, right?
I agree.
It's what don't the children know how to do? And then based on that, what should I be doing to children or making them do instead of, oh, this is a basic understanding, like when we talk about developmentally appropriate practice, one of the considerations is what do children typically need this at this age, or what might they be doing, or
Yeah.
how can I support that? Um,
Yeah.
uh, and that's much, then we move down into what we know about the individuals, which also comes from observing. But we get into that. Well, it's assessment time.
Yep.
So we're going to
Yep.
spend this week doing checklists.
Yep.
And then we'll have conferences next week with this questionable information that we got
Right.
from only doing 1 week, watching all these children and seeing what they show us and don't show us
And I
on
think
that
that's,
day.
I think just even like using the term assessment, what I've noticed in my dialogue and conversations with educators is we throw around assessment, screening,
Uh-huh.
evaluation. Um, you know, we don't really think about assessment as such a broad, all encompassing way
Right.
that we look at children, that we get to know children, that we enter into this cycle of inquiry when we get interested in something they're doing. Like it's all such rich assessment. And it's true. We just go back to some
Mhm.
checklist or it's like we're stuck in that grading and ranking kind of
Mhm.
brain.
Well, yeah, and I think when because we may not call it this, but if we're honest, we're looking for deficits, right? We're
Yeah.
looking for what they can't do that we can then,
Mhm. Yeah.
we'll call it scaffolding, but we really, are talking about um, trying to stretch them without any indicators of whether they're ready for that stretch sometimes. But I think the deficit is in me so often. Like
Mhm.
I don't know what I should be really looking at, or I don't know how to make the learning stories work that we'll talk about here in a minute, or how to make time to do it more authentically.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm the one that
Yeah.
needs some sort of skill building plan. Like
Yeah.
it's not the children who need that, it's me.
Yes, yes. It's sort of like you were talking about, I think a couple weeks ago, about people saying that kids don't know how to play, and
Yeah,
they don't know how to play the way we might envision play should look, and
right.
it might not be neat and tidy.
Yeah,
And maybe we don't understand that whole long process of learning how to
yeah,
play along with others,
yeah.
but they
I've
play.
given them a full 20 minutes of free play and they just don't know how to
Yeah,
use it. Like,
they're just
well,
bumping things all over the place.
right? That's actually a you problem, not a them problem.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you had some questions that you sent to kind of guide the conversation, and the first one was just kind of what is documentation? So that's another buzzword that flies around when we talk about assessment,
Yeah.
um, and it usually ends up being um, again, just, well, I've checked it off on this paper. That's my documentation.
Right.
I've turned in my forms. We've entered it into our system. That's our documentation.
Yeah.
What would you challenge about that?
Well, I was just thinking, like, I think people are so intimidated by the word documentation. And I was just thinking back over my career, and because we've been working on this project at my school, trying to find new ways to assess children, I've been having so many conversations with educators and
Mhm.
realizing that like I said, we have so many ideas about assessment and mixing it up with documentation, or when does it converge? So just thinking about my journey, thinking about just starting out as a teacher who loved writing down children's stories, right? So
Mhm.
I was in that Vivian Paley kind of mindset, and writing everything down and writing down their words and their stories, um, and then just kind of throwing all their scribbles and easel paintings and cool photos that I took of their block buildings, just kind of throwing it all in a
Mhm.
folder. I would just have this sort of messy process. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I did always have that sense that this is so slippery. It's just evaporating, these moments, and I can catch them. I can catch their words. And
Mhm.
I remember just like certain word, like I remember this little girl was telling me about how she was going to be a princess and she was going to wear Paul Nellish. She said nail Paul Nellish. And I remember writing down the words Paul Nellish, and
Uh-huh.
her mom and I were just so connected over the way that she spoke and the
Oh,
story. And
yeah.
it was like I started feeling like documentation is so powerful because the way parents were responding to
Sure,
me.
and because that tells that parent that you really see her, you really know her individual, um, quirks or personality or those kinds of um, sort of grammar, vocabulary kinds of uh, inventions that they have for
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah.
So it can give us great information, but it also, yeah, connects in a way that
Mhm.
going over a checklist at a conference doesn't
No.
or
So
can't.
I mean, I always had that messy process. And then when I became a director of a school, I was trying to help people figure out what we wanted to do. What was our documentation system? How would we be starting portfolios? Will we be collecting samples from children? Will we be taking photos? So I worked with a variety of groups of teachers, and we've read a lot about Reggio and what is the Project Zero, the making
Mhm,
learning visible, trying to really understand the purpose of documentation, and seeing that authentic way of capturing those moments and seeing significance in what the children
mhm.
are doing as our assessment. But there's just so many ways to look at it, and there's so many ways to practice it.
Mhm.
It's just such a messy process in my
Yeah,
experience.
and that's probably part of the appeal of the checklist assessment
Mhm.
system is it's sort of tidy. We feel like it's inconvenient, it's paperwork we've got to do, we've got to interrupt our day, whatever. Um, but it is simpler
Yes.
compared to like a learning story where you're watching an individual child and maybe there's a photo and you're writing this story essentially for the child and the family, about what you see happening and what you wonder about what's happening. And that, I mean, that's a skill that you need to develop, and Tom Drummond mentions that in this article. But so much of what we do, I think, in early childhood is about what's the easiest.
Mhm. Yeah, it's true.
Turnover certainly contributes to that because you
It
don't
does.
keep people long enough to really work through that. But they hear something like, what you're describing, and they think, "Ugh, I can't do that for 24 children."
I know, right? I
Like,
know.
well, what do we feel like is important? And you find time for the things that you feel like are important, right?
Right. And the thing, like last year, we kind of, I've been here at this school for a year. So in the spring, we let go of our checklist for
Uh-huh.
parent conferences. And it really did make people really nervous.
Yeah.
And I did feel, I'm a lab school, and just feeling like, can I do, I'm connected to the psychology department,
Oh,
and
uh-huh.
what are people going to think if I'm, not using these. The checklist was like yes, no, or
Mhm.
emerges.
Yeah.
And the teachers were sharing some pretty intense stories about how they all had different sort of interpretations of whether to put a yes or a no or emerges in the
Mhm.
checklist, which we think is so,
Yeah,
measurable.
right.
And also like how the parents had interpreted it,
Uh-huh.
and how parents had argued with them, like, well, she does that at home. I'm sorry she doesn't do
Yeah.
it at school, but I think it, or not understanding
Yeah.
the context. And so I had at first said, you can still use that language, but let's just not show parents the checklist, because I think that they get really hung up and think that we're
Mhm.
grading children. But then finally we just sort of threw it out, and I found, you know, just sort of relying on everything I had read about documentation and Reggio, and the sort of pedagogy of listening. Like, it could be such a rich practice for us all in my school to shift into this listening, watching mode. And then I found these resources that got me excited, like Tom Drummond's website,
Uh-huh.
which is just full of really, really good examples. It helps to see other people's examples, right?
Mhm.
And articles. And there's a book, a few books by in New Zealand by Margaret Carr and Wendy Lee, learning story books.
I just got that last fall and I
It
haven't
goes,
read it
yeah,
yet.
I
Mhm.
know. It's really like it really gives you such validation for
Mhm.
moving forward with this work.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we're kind of at the beginning of it for my school. Although I've documented and made portfolios for children in lots of different ways and made panels of projects
Mhm.
that we've done. This is the first time we've really kind of taken on this as a whole school,
Mhm.
learning stories as our way
Yeah.
of assessing children and connecting with parents. And I'm so excited about it.
Yeah. And so you mentioned making learning visible, and I first heard that term maybe 20 some years ago in an
Mhm.
article with Margie Carter in one
Yeah,
of her monthly exchange art, her regular exchange articles.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and that has always like that was immediately mind changing for
Right?
me to rephrase it from um, assessment and documentation to making learning visible.
Yeah.
So I have to understand the learning that's happening, and then I have to figure out who else, needs to see this or would be interested in seeing this. And so there's like I don't do documentation panels per se. I do a lot of bulletin boards though with
Mhm,
photos and
mhm,
descriptors or learning
mhm.
stories for each child up there.
Yeah,
And it does um, force me to be in the moment with
yeah,
children and to think of it in more terms of, well, this should just be ongoing. And
yes.
then at some point, if I do have to fill out a checklist, because my boss requires it or our funders require it, or I have to, teaching strategies, gold, whatever, I have to enter all this stuff. I have
Mhm.
much more authentic ways of looking at whether I have seen those things than
Yeah,
if I just say, like I used to, well, assessments are due in a month. It's time for us to start observing children.
right.
And I'm going to give them, 1 day per child where I look at their checklist and try and see, or I'm going to go by memory and see, okay, I don't think I've seen them do that.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
right.
or, the recency effect.
Mhm.
We think we're thinking about the whole time that we've known this child, but we're really probably only thinking about the couple weeks
Yeah, yeah,
within the time you're doing that. So you could still do this sort of documentation, making learning visible, using a learning story to tell those stories. I love just thinking about it as storytelling instead
yeah,
of assessment.
yes. That helps us a
But we can
lot,
still find ways to work those requirements in if those requirements are in fact required.
right?
Sometimes we think they are, and they aren't really, like a lot of things when we get into regulatory conversations. But
The
uh,
thing that whole idea about telling a story has been, I think, the most powerful thing for me and the teachers here. And thinking about like what we value as a school, if we value storytelling and
mhm,
conversation and listening, everything that that means, right? Storytelling, narrative, conversation, listening, connecting, stories are so rich.
mhm,
But then if we also sort of think about how a story shapes a child's identity, like that learning stories can tell us the story of the child,
mhm.
who the child is, and it can also influence who the child is becoming. And just now with this school that I'm at, we have 0 to 5. So now I'm like, imagine the 3-year-old with their portfolio reading their learning story from when they were a baby
Mhm.
and how that shapes their identity, how
Yep,
that it's so beautiful. It's just
yep,
it's such, and what is it that we want to say to families about our role in their lives and
yep,
about, you know, early learning? What is it we want to say to them?
yeah.
So
And sometimes, he in this article, he talks about there not being a right or wrong way to
mhm,
do a learning story. Um, I know that some people, when they do a learning story, they leave space for the family to respond too.
yeah,
So this is an interactive storytelling kind of,
yeah,
and that made me think of programs I've been in where we send a notebook home at the end of the day and the families can write, whatever they think we need. And it's
yeah,
always a report of what they did the night
yeah, yeah,
before. Um, But this is, again, inviting families to show us their competence
Yes.
and their experience with their child. And the connection is deeper, and we're getting better information that can help us learn more about the child. We ask at the end of the day, well, is anything happening at home? Because he's really acting weird. And we think that that's asking for usable information that we can use. But this idea of sharing a story about
Yeah.
their child. I mean, what parent isn't engaged by a story told by someone who clearly likes the child and is also
Yeah.
enthusiastic about this
We
story?
started the year, it's because we got portfolios for all the classrooms. We just got like 3-ring binders,
Yeah.
and we took a big photo on the front, that slided in that plastic sleeve on
Uh-huh.
the front. And then we started out by asking, sending a, a piece of paper home to all the
Uh-huh.
families with it says my family, so they can send in photos. So we were thinking that would be a nice way to kind of get the kids connected to their portfolios,
Uh-huh.
because I didn't want the teachers to feel a lot of pressure in the fall to fill them up, to get them ready for conferences.
Yeah.
I wanted to get away from this sort of like scrapbooking mentality, like we have to be laminating things and
Yes.
framing things and making things look lovely because parents are coming for
Yeah.
conferences, but more like, well, let's start with a photo of the child and a photo of their family, and maybe just keep it pretty casual this semester. Maybe you're punching holes in their work if they are doing some mark making that seems significant, or they're beginning to try to write their name, or they're making their first scribbles. Maybe there's just a few little artifacts you can save, and then maybe we could each write a story for each
Uh-huh.
child. That's been our goal. We could
Uh-huh.
each write a story, a learning story. And it's just, for me, this most surprising thing has been my relationship with the teachers, and being able to sit with teachers and having, we've come so far with technology too. So we have platforms where we can share all our photos and we can
Uh-huh.
edit others' work and all that. But just being able to sit with teachers, and sometimes I would get a learning story, I would read it, I would look and say, wow, there's a couple really cool photos there. And those are beautiful photos. And they really did capture something special. And then I'd read what the teacher wrote, and I couldn't quite figure out why it was significant or how it was really
Mm.
going to kind of guide us in this
Mhm.
process. And then I would sit and talk with the teacher, and she would say, oh, I took those photos because this and this and this and this. And because at the beginning of the year, he never did that. And now he does it. And I said,
Oh.
oh my gosh, that's everything. You just told me everything I was wondering. So just encouraging the teachers to really put it on
Yeah.
paper and tell the
Yeah.
story.
I
Tell the
bet
story.
I bet directors or coaches or whoever could use learning stories for teacher development, like
So
write a learning
much.
story about what you saw the teacher
That's what I keep thinking I should
practicing and
do. That's
developing.
exactly
Yeah,
what I think,
that
like,
would be great.
if I could get myself grounded, just, the next phase for me as a leader would just be to observe the teachers and write their
Yeah,
stories. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
So I want to like, I don't have a sample learning story if it's
Oh,
new for people, but I want to just read this opening bit from the article that talks about Tom Drummond noticing things
yeah. Yes, I
for
love that.
yeah. So he's watching Josie, one of his preschool students. Josie pushed the piece of paper as she was painting toward the paint tray until it formed a hill. So you have to kind of visualize, in a learning story, there'd be a photo maybe. She dipped her brush in the paint, dropped a blob at the top of the hill, and watched it drip down the paper. Intrigued, Josie filled her brush again and added another drop of paint to the top of the slope and pushed the paper closer to the paint tray, making the hill even steeper. Josie watched intently as the drop slowly made its way down to the bottom of the hill. And I love this part. In Josie, Drummond saw not only a painter, but also a scientist. And then one of the things he writes in the learning story is, Josie, you discovered how to make paint draw a line by sliding it down a hill. You concentrated on how it moved. You did an experiment, and you watched the effect of the hill on that drip that you caused. That careful looking is how scientists discover how things work. You wondered about something and you figured it out.
Isn't that great?
I think that's so beautiful. Maybe that's I don't know. I think it's beautiful. It kind of choked me up a little bit
Mhm.
to think about a preschool age child being seen that deeply.
Right? Right?
Um, and and a teacher having that kind of authentic curiosity, and not just, well, that's not what I meant when I put out the paints, or, oh, this is going to be really messy to clean up, or She's not going to have a thing to send home that looks like the project I wrote on my lesson plan, all the other things that can distract us as teachers. This was just an adult really being interested in and respectful of something he saw a child deeply engaged in.
It really asks us to be in the moment, and it
Yeah.
asks us to think of sort of the art of teaching, and to be surprised and to be full of wonder, just like we want the children to be.
Mhm.
All those things. It asks me as a leader to to give the teachers the grace that I give the children too, right? Because we
Sure.
all have different voices and different perspectives, and none of us see the same thing.
Mhm.
So it's rich.
Um, I was looking for something specific in the article, and now I don't
Yeah,
remember what it
yeah.
was.
Were you thinking of the farming stuff?
Oh, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. So they ask him, this is sort of an interview. Um, they ask him what, oh, shoot, where is it going? Where is it? Anyway, so they ask him kind of what he sees as sort of wrong directions in early childhood education. Um, and he describes, I'm just going to keep babbling until I find it in here. This is excellent podcasting. Gosh, he talks about the agricultural method, and I thought it was I didn't highlight it. I thought, oh, here it is. Okay. So they ask him uh, about assessments specifically and the way we use assessments in early childhood now. And he talks about it. He would like to get away from the centralized control of daily life of children and staff. It's stifling to individuals, distracts us from the central importance of what we're doing. And then he says no one really looks at those forms and files, and they take up so much of an educator's day. And he suggests instead we move towards an agricultural model. And he talks about how we don't measure the carrots every day. We don't pull them out and measure and stick them back in if they need more growing. We don't check off carrot growing stages.
Right.
They emerge from the genetic information in the seed, and with optimal care and elimination of toxins, that information can be maximized to its fullest extent. And that's how farmers learn.
Right.
And that was powerful for me. I'd never heard of that, heard that analogy. We talk about planting seeds and we talk about tending gardens,
Mhm.
but not in the context of assessment
Right.
usually.
I think it requires us to have faith in human development, right?
Yeah. And
And
that's hard to do when you're constantly looking at this list of should be's.
mhm.
Um, we can look at a checklist of what 3-year-olds should be doing, but there's 12 months in being 3 years
Yeah.
old. There's so much experience and practice that the older 3-year-old has that the younger 3-year-old hasn't had the opportunity to do yet, or just biological maturation that needs to happen.
Mhm.
So I think this is such a good connection to make.
Yeah, it is. Some of my teachers are writing the stories like just like Tom did, like just really zooming in on a moment,
Mhm. Yeah.
and other ones are kind of looking back over the course of a few weeks, especially for the babies and toddlers when they've had maybe some difficult transitions and they've had that special day when the
Mhm.
baby finally relaxes and doesn't cry or drop off. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of neat thing too about taking those photos, because you look back and you see, oh, look how the baby's clutching you
Mhm.
know, their like transitional object, and here they finally dropped it and now they're
Mhm.
playing with the water or something. And you can see sort of you can tell a story also that isn't just that moment, but it is
Mhm.
so rich when you can just dive into the and
Yeah.
describe like he did with the paint dripping, describe those though it makes it feel so, I don't know, so honoring to me,
Yeah.
because children are constantly creating. They're
Yeah.
just so imaginative and inventive, and it's
Yeah.
overwhelming to think about what we can focus on and what we can catch, but we can catch some
Yeah.
some
That's
moments.
another one of the things that I talk to with students sometimes, and I feel like, am I being too dramatic about this? But I love to talk about the honor of being part of that moment. And I
Right?
believe it. That's
Yeah.
how I feel. Even like parents will thank me or whatever at the end of the day. And I was like, usually, even when it's sort of difficult, it's still such an honor to be part of those moments. And so this sort of system really pulls you in when you get burdened. But I used to tell my teachers when I was a director, the day you're watching the clock should be the day that you're looking for these moments. Like you should, when you're thinking, oh, I have a full hour left, oh, it's going to be forever. That's a full hour that you can spend putting yourself back into the moment with children. And what better way to do it than to write down what you wonder about what you're seeing, or just to describe in detail what they're seeing. But it comes back to too, and you've mentioned Reggio Emilia several times, it comes back to the image of the child, I think.
Yes, right.
You have to believe that children are competent and that these little moments happen and are valuable. You have to believe that, instead of, well, they are all just sort of walking deficits that I'm here to fix.
Right.
And I'm the one with the skill and the knowledge, and I'm just gonna impart that. And the ones who don't participate, then, well, they don't really want to learn.
And I think it goes like with that emergent curriculum model and that constructivist, going back to that, like it's not, if we spend our days thinking about what we're going to teach children, then we write our newsletter about like the pumpkin theme or what we taught them, instead of the reverse is, what are they learning? How are they learning?
What are they showing me
Who
that
are
they
they?
know?
Who are they, right? Who is the child?
Yeah.
So there's still this really rich opportunity to talk about what learning is in a way that's probably going to change the way parents see their children too.
Yeah. I think the other side of learning stories for me is advocacy too, right? We can make that deep learning, that deep wondering. I don't think that we can say this is exactly what they're learning. Like, I know in this moment, this is what they're learning, but we can wonder and we can describe and we can talk about what they might be, exploring, and the specific actions we take, and connecting that to what's typical exploration kind of stuff for this age group. And we can really use that with administrators and co-teachers and families, to help kind of bring them on board to be part of that.
Such a freshness. Like some of the teachers I'm working with are brand new to the field, and they don't have a big body of knowledge in terms of the developmental stages or anything.
Yeah.
And just sitting with them has been so much fun. One of the teachers had written a story about this. He was doing a collage. They had gone on a nature walk, and they put out some glue and the acorns and leaves and all the treasures that they collected. And he was watching this child work, and he wrote down some of the things the child said about the properties of a glue being icky and gooey, and the way the child put his hand in the glue. And then the child was asking a lot of questions about the glue itself, like, where did the glue come from? And can I use it all? And do you have more glue? And so he wrote that story, and then we were talking about it. And I was like, so what, again, what is it about this story that is significant? What caught you? And he said, well, he asked really unusual questions. He asked me, I was thinking he'd be focused on the acorns and the leaves and the nature walk. He's really focused on the stickiness of the glue and wanting to use all the glue and the power of squeezing the glue. And, and so he asked questions that I wasn't expecting. So then I was able to say to that new teacher, like, okay, well, let's keep looking at him through this lens about looking at the kind of questions he asks. And, so that day, that teacher was able to write down 5 or 6 more questions this child asked. Then they were really good questions and unusual questions. I was like, oh, that's so great, because now, and what do we want to say about the questions this child asks? And the teacher was like, well, it's smart to ask questions, and it shows me that you're curious and you're full of wonder, and I hope you're always asking these good questions, So it was just, I don't know.
Sounds like school readiness to me.
Right. Just like the way it was constructed between me and this new teacher, having this dialogue, it was just, I felt it was so heartwarming, and to be, and I was with him in the classroom, like, oh, did you hear that question? You know, we were writing down the questions
I
together.
love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then so I think there's this opportunity for this rich, like reflective dialogue between
Mhm.
colleagues and between supervisors and teachers, and we give each other. There was another little boy, a teacher wrote about his kindness. He was so generous in such creative ways. I have the story here. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
I'll change the names.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll say, Tom, I enjoyed observing you play and interact with your new classmates on the playground. Today, I noticed you watching two of your classmates, Susie and Billy. You and Billy are working diligently building your own separate structures with hollow blocks in the schoolyard. Susie is sitting on Billy's building and he is asking her to step away, get out, move away, get down. And she's upset. She wants to be part of the block building, but she doesn't have a spot. You watch for a bit and then you say out loud, I have a seat over here and nobody's sitting on it. And that's why I wanted to build it. I just built it. And then Susie looks at you and she stops crying and you say, you can stay here if you like. And she comes over to your block building and you pat the space and tell her, show her where she can sit. And then you sit right next to her and you tell her, you can sit here anytime you want to. You can sit here all day if you like to, and all night. And if it gets dark outside, you can come to my house.
I love it. Oh,
I
wow.
didn't read that very well, but it was just
No,
so
that was
beautiful. And then
great.
she has a
Yeah.
couple photos of them. You know, it was just such a moment. Like this child was kind of getting sad and feeling a little rejected
Yeah.
and not able to figure out how to enter the play. And he was so generous. So
Mhm.
I read that story. And then that day I went into the classroom and I sat down, they were having snack. And he came over to me and he's like, Carol, your butt doesn't fit in that chair. I was like, what? And he goes, I have another chair for you. And
Oh.
I was like, I have this lens. Like,
Uh-huh.
oh my gosh, he is so like, he's watching
Uh-huh.
me and he wants me to be comfortable. Just like I just read this story that his teacher wrote about him making a
Uh-huh.
spot for little Susie to
Yeah.
join him.
I
And
love that.
so,
And
yeah,
it gives the teacher an active role. Like I think part of the difficulty sometimes when we talk about giving children more agency and realizing their competence, the teachers wonder, well, then what's my role? If I'm
yeah,
not there navigating that social situation and coaching and giving them language for, then what is my role? Well, my role is to notice it and reinforce it and then share the story with the
yeah.
child. Like we never think about it, sharing information about the child with the child unless we're correcting them or giving them
Right,
just a very
right.
vague good job.
And
So
then
that's cool.
like, yeah, so that whole idea about storytelling is helpful.
Mhm.
And this other idea, some of the teachers are like writing the letter directly to the child.
Yeah.
She followed that up by saying, I saw how you felt compassion for Susie and offered her a solution when you saw she was upset. I noticed that you are often thoughtful and caring with your playmates. This isn't the first time I've seen you care for your peers. You
Aw.
are gentle and kind in your approach. You're so aware of our classroom. And if there's a conflict or a child is upset, you often make it a priority to check in on them. You know, just like she wrote a little like, love your teacher,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
The other thing that I noticed is that there's a lot of descriptive language. There's a lot of adjectives and adverbs in there, and we're
Mhm.
taught when we're doing observations to keep it objective and to
Yes. Yes.
not insert any of that. I mean, I understand we don't want to be like he was just terrible and he
Right,
was a
right,
being a bully and that, but um there's a warmth in
yeah.
that while it's still authentic and still gives you good information about the child and about that child's development um and
It
that
was
child's
beautiful.
priorities, but it's so I guess we can maybe step away from some of that thinking too, that it all just needs to be just the facts, ma'am, when we're doing an observation.
Right. And how do we admire the intelligence of children,
Mhm.
right? And so and admire the children themselves,
Yep.
and reflect
Yeah.
that we see their disposition, we see their
Mhm.
temperament, we see these learning characteristics,
Yeah.
the desire, the the desire for knowledge, the questions that they ask, all these great
Yeah.
foundational skills that are going to take them far in life.
And if you go back to the glue and the acorn and leaves story, it's a good example of what Lillian Katz means when she talked about a distinction between intellectual skills and academic skills.
Yeah.
And how we leave behind consideration for intellectual skills because we're so worried about those rote academic kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we really saw that little guy's intellectual skills with the kinds of questions he was asking and the way he focused on his own question and not on the teacher's product.
Right.
Yeah. I want to come hang out at your school.
It's really this. I really feel grateful for the learning story work because I needed to connect more with my new, educators, and it's they're taking such risks to do things differently, and then I'm so grateful to people like Tom Drummond, and there's a whole network. It's called Salsa. It's Support for Learning Stories in America at SLSA. There's a group that did a conference. So it's starting to feel like a real valid assessment tool that I can learn.
Yeah. That's awesome. I have to go check that out now too. I'd not heard of that group before.
Yes.
Well, we maybe should wrap up because we keep going. But I will say, Tom Drummond, if you want to go to his website, it's TOMDRUMMOND.com. Lots of stuff about learning stories. And
Salsa is the group.
Salsa, SLSA.
SALSA.
SALSA. Oh, just like the salsa.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Do you have anything else? I mean, I know I'm trying to wrap it up a little bit, but was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, and I guess just that connection between since I wrote that book, Illuminating Care. Like, I'm excited about the care stories too, in terms of like, the learning moments during meals and during snack and all the ways that we flow in and out of care and education and teaching and learning with children. Like, I think that there's just so much potential to show what we value.
Yeah, I didn't think about that connection. I use it a lot with play to like advocate for children's choice in play. But yeah, to use learning stories in a care context would be really valuable, really effective.
And I think also like the work you're doing with schemas and like Deb Curtis and Marge Carter's, they have samples, right? Learning stories, the visionary director book. It's like, it's all coming together for me at this point when I've been doing this work for 30 years. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Yay. All right. So weird to hear you say the work you're doing with schemas. Like, I don't know. That feels weird.
No, I think that I've been talking a lot, like just again with my new teachers, like, okay, he's lining up the blocks end to end, what would we call that?
Yes.
Positioning, or he's transferring. So that language is helping, I think, give play its own intelligence.
Yeah.
And I think there's like this signature pedagogy you start to develop as a school when you keep having these conversations.
Yeah.
So it does make me like, I think I told you, I feel like we should have a field guide of I don't know, just ways, nothing to take the onus or the ownership off the educator to be observing. But I just feel like once you start having these conversations with educators, you're like, wow, that's a great way to say that, or I see what you mean about the marks he's making and the way he's experimenting with cause and effect. I never saw it that way before.
Yeah.
Or the way that Tom wrote about the scientific thinking that child's doing. You start to develop, I don't know, just a signature way of the language that identifies you, right? That gives you an identity as a school.
I love it. I need to buy a lottery ticket. I keep talking about winning the lottery and starting my own place. I guess I need to buy the ticket. I can't win the lottery if I don't buy the ticket. Because every time I talk to you, I'm like, I need to be back in direct care. I need to be working with teachers and children every day.
It is really exciting, but you're doing really good work.
I hope so. Yeah.
You are.
Well, this was really great. I can't wait to hear people's responses to this one. I usually get more comments and things from episodes that you're on. So.
Oh, that's so nice. I just feel like people should know it's so like, it doesn't have to be so overwhelming.
Uh-huh.
I've been trying to figure it out for so many years, and it's just a messy process, and it gets
Yeah.
so exciting. And when you get that feedback from parents, it's just, you feel so connected. I don't
Yeah.
know how we're going to evolve at our school with the portfolios and the parent input. We're at the beginning,
Yeah.
and we really did let go of a very clinical model. So
Mhm.
it's a little bit risky. It feels brave and exciting.
Yeah, I love it. I can't wait to hear more.
Thank
All
you
right.
so
Well, thanks,
much.
Carol. This was so much fun. I think I said that before, but I'll say it again because
You
I mean
too.
it.
I hope you have a great
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening and come back again next week for another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.